Hello and welcome to today's webinar on taking your research offline to libraries, archives, and other repositories. My name is Ginevra Morse, Director of Education and Online Programs at American Ancestors and New England Historic Genealogical Society. I will be moderating today's event. We are a nonprofit organization supported by our members and donors. We provide resources and expertise in nearly all aspects of family history and are pleased to offer such programming for our members and friends around the world. Our presenter today is Senior Genealogist Rhonda McClure. Rhonda is a nationally recognized professional genealogist and lecturer, specializing in New England and celebrity research as well as computerized genealogy. Her areas of expertise include immigration and naturalization, late 19th and early 20th century urban research, federal records, New England, Midwest, Southern, German, Italian, Scottish, Irish, French, Canadian, and New Brunswick. I swear that list gets longer every time I say it. So surely many of you joining us today have already delved into online resources for your family history research. It's quick, it's convenient, and it's at your fingertips. However, by focusing on those online resources, you are truly just hitting the tip of the genealogical iceberg. There are millions of records out there that you can only find at bricks and mortar repositories. So today we're going to demonstrate the importance of taking your research offline, how to find research centers that hold the records that you need, how to prepare for your visit, and why you might consider participating in a genealogical research tour. At any point during the presentation, feel free to type your question in the panel to the right of your screen. We'll address those at the end. There is no handout for this presentation, but we are recording this event, and starting tomorrow, you can easily go back and review any of the content from this presentation on our website. So if you missed something on today's first listen, don't worry, you can always go back and review the presentation. All right, so with that, I will turn things over to Rhonda.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Going offline is something that a lot of people think doesn't need to happen anymore, but as you can see from our little picture there are quite a lot of books and other materials that aren't online yet. So let's just talk about that, because we hear it's all online. I don't have to go to any repository. There are a lot of things that are online, that's true, and believe us, we here at the NEHS and American Ancestors Research Center, we love online, but not everything is online. There are tons of things that are not yet available and may never be available online. Many libraries that did digitize some of their offerings still have tons of resources that are not online. And as the Family History Library has been digitizing records that they previously had on microfilm, they may require you to access those records through their actual internal system, either the Family History Library or a Family History Center. So not everything can be accessed from home, and a lot of things, as Ginevra already mentioned, is just the tip of the genealogical iceberg, as we say. Sometimes, though, it can be misleading as to what we're actually viewing. So here is a screenshot from Ancestry.com, and I've highlighted something up top. This is the title of the database that you're searching. So U.S. Homestead Records, 1863 to 1908. This sounds great. Sounds like everything's there. But what few of us remember to do is to look at the source information, which is below where we type in all of our names and dates. This is what is actually telling you what you're searching. And it's the original data that you want to pay attention to. So in this particular case, it's land entry case files, homestead final certificates. So we're going to get back to this because we're going to use this as an example, but this is a little different from what the title is on Ancestry. That tells me that there's a limitation to the records that I'm seeing online. But first, let's talk about special collections. Special collections are those collections that are one-of-a-kind things. They may be a manuscript that somebody's compiled. It could be photographs, maps, diaries, anything that has been donated that may be in a paper form. Sometimes even ephemera is also donated as well, but it's a one-of-a-kind item in most instances. And these types of collections are what we want to really concentrate on and get deep into, because those are the types of collections that may never be online or are coming online very, very slowly. Perfect example, here we have the R. Stanton Avery Special Collections, which is the department within the American Ancestors Research Center here in Boston. This is our own special collections, manuscript collections, and this is just one of the many, many, many rows of boxes that we have here, and then there's tons that are off-site. Now, pay attention to the size of those boxes, because that's something that we're going to refer to as we're progressing, in that what is termed a particular size of a collection. But I did ask our archivist, Judy Lucy, if she could give me an estimate as to how many, what she thought of the collections that they have is actually online through our website. She said that it's between 1% and 2%, and quite frankly, if I said 2%, that would be generous. So hopefully that's giving you a sense of how small of a collection is actually online. So let's take a look at a couple of our collections that we have here in Boston. On the left, you see the William Emery Nickerson papers, and there's some kind of forms, and that particular collection is in 41 boxes. So those gray boxes that you just saw on the shelves, 41 of those make up the Nickerson family. On the right, we have the Robardo Dwyer papers. That manuscript is in 26 boxes, and then it also has 3 published volumes. So again, think in terms of those boxes, and you can get a sense of how much information may not actually be online. So we're going to actually play around with the Robardo Dwyer papers for a moment and show you what may or may not be there. So I went straight to the Ireland, the Annals of Bera, which is the name of the 3-volume book set that comes out of that collection of Robardo Dwyer papers. I put in just a surname of Sullivan and a place Trefasque, and I did a search. What I came up with was a scanned image from the books showing the names of a couple, and then there's some information for each of those couples, usually their children, maybe who they married, etc. And you can notice up at the top here that yes, you would be able to change from volume 1 to volume 2. If you had a certain source citation and you had a page number, you could go to that as well. But I'm curious to see if everything that is on the paper made it into the book and therefore made it online. So I compared the 2 items. So here we have the page that I showed you earlier that is from the actual original 26 boxes. It's for Patrick O'Sullivan and Catherine O'Dwyer, and it's a continuation because the way he wrote it took multiple pages. And to the right, or to the left upper top, I have the entry that was in the books and therefore is online. Now I took 2 of their children. I took Cornelius first and Margaret second. And so right here, number 3, we have Con, and then in parentheses, November 1877. He was a policeman in Lowell, Massachusetts. He married Johanna, known as Annie Harrington, or Cappy, daughter of Timothy Harrington Cappy and Joanna O'Sullivan of Massmount. That part all matches up with the information that we see to the far right of the handwritten piece. But what was missing from Con's entry? Well, down here in the first blue box, I show you what was missing. The first thing is he's abbreviated him as Con, which maybe he went by, but he was baptized as Cornelius. And so his full name is not given in the transcribed online version, just the abbreviation. The exact date of his baptism is not there. We can see it over here on the right-hand side where it says baptized November 3rd, 1877. And the priest who baptized him is not mentioned, although that is included in the handwritten. And finally, a very important part when it comes to doing Irish research, the sponsors who are basically the godparents are not mentioned in the typed version. So that's a lot of it because those sponsors could be relatives somehow and may clue you into how your family ends up interacting with this family or why your DNA is giving you connections that you're now seeing. If we compare Margaret here, so Margaret, September 1883, then settled in the home and married and I'm not even going to butcher the Gaelic there, basically that translates to an in-law, Mark Downing, son of James Downing and Ellen O'Sullivan of Cura. Comparing what we find is that, once again, her exact date of baptism, the priest, and the sponsors are missing from her entry, but more importantly, the exact marriage date is not included in her typed version, although it is listed over here in the handwritten one. And once again, the witnesses to the marriage are also not included in the typed online version, once again giving us possibly additional names, surnames, and towns or townlands nearby that we might need to focus on. So this is just one page out of 26 boxes, and you can see just some of the things that are missing from two of the children. Another example of an archive is the Boston City Archives in West Roxbury. You can see here they have tons of ledgers of different kinds. They have hundreds of collections, but one of the ledgers that they have that can be very useful is the Register of Women Voters, which you see on our right here, handwritten with their signatures, thus giving us a tangible piece of our person with their residence, but also more importantly, place of birth and some other information, especially if they were being naturalized, etc. This is not online. This is not indexed online. The only way you can view this is if you actually physically go to the Boston City Archives, or you usually hire a researcher to go if you can't physically come to Boston. One of the largest archives, of course, for the United States is the National Archives in Washington, D.C. And our upper left picture is a picture inside their reading room. And the reading room is basically where you can go and look at original records. And you'll see that they can come on carts, and the carts can have many, many of those boxes. And this is what a box looks like up close. So on the right, you can see a couple of the boxes that have been pulled for somebody. But in addition to those, you may also find things like this ledger that is from the 1920s that has some individuals who had some issues and weren't going to be able to stay in the U.S. and thus were being deported. But it's not one of those things that is really known about or that has been indexed. Now, when we think of record group 85, most of the time, even though it's records of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, most people think of just the passenger lists. And so you can see a couple of them here as examples, handwritten, sometimes easier to read than others. And those, of course, have been digitized. They're on Ancestry, they're on FamilySearch. You can look at them to your heart's content, maybe do some searches, etc. But let's look at record group 85 as a whole, the records of the Immigration and Naturalization Service. So record groups are how the National Archives organizes their records within their building. And record group 85 is for those immigration and naturalization records. The dates encompass completely 1787 to 1993, and then they tell us in parentheses that the bulk of those is 1882 to 1957. Below that, we see a table of contents. Now, this online list that I'm showing you is part of a guide to federal records, and they have digitized this guide so that it's easier to find things and know what they have and where they're at. We'll get into how to use that later on this afternoon. But as we look at that table of contents and look to see what's there, there are actually 9 major subheadings in Record Group 85, from administrative history all the way down to what they call machine readable records from 1971 to 93. And I've put a red box around the passenger lists from 1882 to 1957. That's just one major subheading. The other records are not online, so you're not going to be able to find them if you're just living in the online genealogical world. As I go to one of those sections, most interest is the general records section. And I've highlighted the textual records. Textual records are what we would consider the manuscripts, those one-of-a-kind pieces of paper that only exist in one place. And you can see here that there is an extensive number of items, including letters that were sent, registers, indexes, subject correspondence, etc. Now, there is one item that was microfilmed, T458, that has now become digitized on Ancestry, and that is the subject guide to the subject and policy files, so correspondence. So the 31 rolls of microfilm that you see mentioned here, that actually is digitized, and you'll see an example of one of those cards down below. Now, there are some names on these cards, but keep in mind that this index is listed as a subject index. So many times there are not names, but subject of cases instead. And so usually, unless you know the exact subject it's under, whether it's a ship arrival, type of disease, something having to do with a particular, in this case, Danish embassy, etc., you may not be able to find anything about your individual. What you see, though, on this card is what's known as a file number. And those file numbers are housed in a collection of boxes at the National Archives, and they're known as the subject and policy files. So here we have a couple of the boxes, and there's a couple of the actual files that we see here that I've pulled out and I'm going to be working through. Now, this is just one of the textual collections that is housed at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. I'd like to point out that in addition to the DC archive, there's what they call Archive 2 in Rockville, Maryland, and then there are regional archives around the country that are focused on dealing with papers that are just for the specific states that fall under them. So not everything's in DC, not everything's online, but this particular collection that is the subject and policy files, it encompasses 7,886 feet of textual records. Now, when I say feet, that's these boxes. So if you were to put the boxes side by side, as you see here, each box that makes up this collection side by side would cover 1.5 miles, or the equivalent of 49.25 football fields. And none of that is online. We're going to look at just this one file here, 55772-610, which I did go and pull at the archives, and I took pictures of. Here you can see all of the pages that were generated from that particular file. And All of these have bits and pieces. There's a lot of correspondence back and forth about what to do, etc. You just never know what you're going to find until you're digging into it. But as you dig into these collections, what you may discover are interviews where they're saying, you know, who they are, where they come from, how they know somebody, etc. You may also find something such as this, which actually did come out of the file we were just looking at. These are his fingerprints that were taken. Sometimes you may find photographs either just by themselves, such as Vito here, or they may be attached to some other piece of paper. In this case, a non-quota immigration visa, which says why she should be allowed in even though she's not a US citizen, and why she should not have to be under a quota system that was in effect in the 1930s. But one of the best parts of these files is the fact that most of them had to go through some kind of, I don't want to call it an interrogation, but an interview where they had to give their name, possibly their age, where they were coming from in the old country, who they knew, who they were going to in this country, you know, were they married, did they have children, etc. Valuable pieces of information that are not online. One of the other tips when you go to these repositories, there are hundreds of websites out there that are subscription sites. And, you know, in a perfect world, we'd all be super rich and we could afford to sign up and pay for each one of them. A lot of these repositories, such as, you know, National Archives, FamilySearch, Family History Library, we here at the, you know, American Ancestors Research Center, we subscribe to a lot of these online sites, thus allowing you to first at least maybe play with them before you decide to put your money down, or maybe just to take advantage if you're nearby to one of those repositories. So yet another reason to go into these brick and mortar places. All right, so where do we go? How do we find out what we need and what we're going to do? The biggest thing that I suggest is that if you can find online catalogs, you always want to search those. Now, there is WorldCat, which is what I call the catalog of catalogs at worldcat.org. And basically, it's going to tell you if a book or other item may be in a library that's nearby to you, because you can put in your zip code and it will tell you like the repositories that have it and how close that is to you. Archive Grid is an equivalent catalog of catalogs, but it deals with the manuscripts. And then we've got the FamilySearch.org catalog, where you see the URL there. If you put that in, it'll take you straight to the catalog. If you are looking into what a specific repository might have, like National Archives or what we might have here at American Ancestors, then you would look at a, you know, go to the repository's website and find their catalog search function. I got to tell you, Google is my friend. I go to Google a lot when I'm looking for things to see what I might find out there, because what does Google do but index the internet? And so a lot of these places where they may have some kind of special collection that they are highlighting on their website will pop up on Google. And there may be other online resources as well. But before we get into that, I do want to stress that next Thursday, two of our staff members, Ann Marangola and Trenton Quarles, are going to be giving a free webinar on finding your family history in library catalogs. So they're going to tell you how to use these catalogs like FamilySearch and WorldCat and the one that we have here at American Ancestors. So you might want to jot down that that's going to happen next Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. All right, so the library at American Ancestors is library.nehgs.org. And we're going to return to our Robard O'Dwyer. And I use the keywords and I just type in Robard because there aren't too many of those around. And what I ended up getting is a result that will give me his papers, which is the manuscript. So here you see the collection, the manuscript. There's also a website finding aid that we'll talk about in a little bit later. And then here's the Annals of Bera, which is that 3-volume set that I told you about that was actually published and then was made into a database. So the catalog search results may give you multiple items and tell you different places where it might be. Some of your catalogs, such as the archives, the National Archives catalog at catalog.archives.gov, very, very simple. Really simple. You type something into that one field. However, you'll notice at the far right that they do have an advanced search. And I like the advanced search, especially at the National Archives, because they have so many collections. Because when I open up that advanced search, I can narrow down my search to specific items. For instance, my biggest one is the record group numbers. So I've kind of blown up that little section and you can see where I can put in a record group number. So for instance, we were talking about record group 85. Well, if all I want is something dealing with that, I can narrow down my search to just that record group. And then I can further narrow it to the type of archival paper, whether it's papers, photos, etc. You can even sometimes narrow it down to a specific repository if they have multiple repositories, such as the archives does. A lot of us use FamilySearch, and we kind of misuse it as far as I'm concerned, because we all go to the FamilySearch, we go to search, and we all go to records, and we type in our names, and we don't find anything, and we immediately dismiss FamilySearch and say there's nothing there. Well, the place that you want to be paying attention to is the catalog, because the catalog is how those of us who've been doing this since before the internet found our items. Because let's face it, when we're looking for things, we're looking for records that are equated to maybe a specific place or type of record. And so if we go to the catalog, we find that we have many, many ways that we can search for those items. And not all of those are going to be online. So as we bring up the example that I've shown, as we go further, I'm going to show you how you can tell what's online at FamilySearch and what's not. But before we get to that, let's talk about Google, because as I said, Google is my friend. So if I'm looking for land entry case files, think back to when we first started this lecture, I showed you that homestead files that's on Ancestry, and I told you that it was the final certificates. So what do I want? I want the actual case files. Is there some additional paperwork? Well, all I do is a very simple search. NARA land entry case files. Very, very simple, nothing fancy about that. And then I start to look at what they give me. And you'll notice the very, very top is coming right off of the Research Archives page, the National Archives page itself. Then there's some other items that I may find of interest as well. Finally, while we're using those online websites, such as Ancestry, it's really important not to just concentrate on typing in names. We do that a lot, and then either we find something or we don't. One of my favorite things is the Browse Collections section, where I can kind of dig around and see how the records are arranged. But more importantly, you want to scroll further down past that fill in the blank field, and you want to look at the source information. So we already looked at this screen. I told you that, the Ancestry title it's a great title because it tells you the types of records, but it's a little misleading in what you're finding. It's the original data that is the key to what is actually going to be searched. In this case, it's almost like an index to those land entry case files. So I've got that underlined. But below that, you'll see a full list of sources can be found here. And you want to click on that, because what you end up with is a whole lot of writing about those homestead records. And What I've highlighted over on the right-hand side is these original pages called case files or land entry files reside at the National Archives and Records Administration in Washington, D.C. They are public records. Copies of the original papers can be obtained from NARA when the proper information is provided and a fee is paid. You can visit the NARA website for details on ordering these files. Or if you're lucky enough to be going to the DC, keep a list of all the ones that you want to do, and then when you're there, you can take your digital photos and have a wonderful time in working with these. Most importantly, I've highlighted the application. So the entryman, the person who went and applied for the homestead records. And homestead records are a way of acquiring land without paying for it. You're agreeing to do certain things like improve the land, maybe build a house on it, etc. So it was a way in which some of our people moved west and got land when they couldn't afford to pay for it. But in doing so, there's a lot of paperwork that was generated, and all that paperwork ended up in the application. So it's those applications that we really, really want, not the final piece of paper that says, congratulations, this is your piece of property, because it's the application that may clue us in to where our ancestor is coming from. Most of your repositories have finding aids. Finding aids are a method in which we can learn more about a large collection, because obviously when you go to the National Archives, you are not going to be able to pull out all 7,886 feet of record group 85. So you have to have a way of requesting just specific pieces of it. So finding aids are the way in which we do that. So if we return to our Robardo Dwyer papers, you'll notice that in our catalog, we have a link to that says website. What this actually takes you to is a finding aid that was compiled of the 26 boxes of physical papers that make up this collection and how they're arranged. So by clicking on that little website, it's going to take you to the finding aid that's been put online. So you can see here that there's a little abstract, and then below that they have volume. That's how much space does it take up. So the 10.5 linear feet is what the 26 boxes take on a shelf. And then the repository and the call number, and then below that were roughly about 20 pages broken down by folder description. And these were arranged by townland and then and or parish, and then had the surnames included. And then each one of them will tell you the physical description. So in this particular case here, the top one, it's one volume of 56 pages. It's folder 129 in box 9 of the 26. So they're going to pull box 9 for you, or the folder in box 9, to give you that original set of pages. The National Archives has a lot of catalogs that can be searched, but one of the things that is a really good resource is the Guide to Federal Records. It was sort of I showed you the table of contents for the passenger lists in Record Group 85. It is designed to identify all of the collections at the National Archives and tell you more about them and how they're arranged, because it's the arrangement and where the pages are located that's critical to us. So if I click on that, I get this lovely little search here, and they tell you about the fact that this is the web version of their guide that was published in 1995. It was 3 8.5 by 11 sized volumes that were very, very heavy, and nobody wanted to carry them. Some libraries have it, and some people back in the dark ages, we all would buy it because that was how we knew how to find things. So what you can do, though, is you can type in, search the guide just randomly. So if I don't know a record group and all I know is I need Homestead, I'm looking for Homestead records, I can type in Homestead and click on search. Obviously, I'm going to get a few hits in that, but the top hit in this instance is the records of the Bureau of Land Management, which is where the homestead files would be. So that's something that's going to be of interest to me. So if I click on that link, I'm going to once again get a very long table of contents. They all start with an administrative history and like general records or general textual records, etc. Then they break it down based on whatever subcategories were pertinent to that particular record group. This one is extremely long, and you're probably saying, well, how am I going to find exactly what I'm looking for? Well, when you get to this page, what you're going to do is you're going to either use Control F if you're running a Windows machine or Command F on a Mac, and then you're going to get this little find box right here, and you can type in the word homestead. Now, there is 93 instances of the word homestead on this web page, but that allows me to really just skip the other text, because you can see these pages are text heavy, and go right to the items that I might be most interested in, including homestead, entries, etc. So I can look at each one of those and get a sense of maybe what they have and where they have it. Because some of those textual records are going to say, yeah, we don't have this in DC, you have to go to, Boston, Massachusetts, or you have to go out to, Illinois or something, wherever they have it in their regional archives. Another go-to for me for finding any type of guidance, if it's a new type of record and I'm not real sure where it might be, who might have it, etc., I do go to FamilySearch's Wiki. This is, like Wikipedia, only for genealogy. And in this case, it's under search once again, and it's all the way at the bottom of the search list, research the wiki. And then what you'll get is a search screen that allows you to put in what you want. I put in land entry, and it gave me a lot of different hits. Now, the top one was land entry case files, which is kind of what I'm looking for. What I like about the FamilySearch Wiki is it's not just what they have at their repository in Salt Lake City. This is designed to point us to the right direction for where the records are. So if I click on the land entry case files, then I'm going to get a description of the value of the case files, the jurisdictions, contents that might be in the case file. So why would I even want to spend time trying to hunt these guys down? And then it also is going to tell me other things such as related websites and further reading on how to use these, and etc. The contents that you see over on the far right is basically how you could jump to a particular section. But when I'm working in a new type of record, I'm going to read the whole thing, and so that I can get the most information possible, so when I do go to a repository, I'm prepared. All right, so we're going to apply some of this knowledge, so from index to record, and see how this works. And we are going to use a case file, an entry that we get from the Bureau of Land Management. So glorecords.blm.gov. It is similar to the homestead database that I showed you from Ancestry. It's just arranged slightly differently. I tend to use it if I'm looking for pertinent details for getting a file, and I'm going to show you how that works as we go forward. So Glo Records, I've put in my search. I've got this wonderful man, George W.J. Abercrombie, and he has land, a homestead entry in Montgomery, Alabama. What we've got at the very, very top is a patent detail. So that's all this text that we're looking at right here. And then there's this wonderful patent image, and everybody clicks there, and we get this wonderful image of the patent. This is that final patent. That's that final piece of paper. Congratulations, this land is yours. Run with it. This is not the only piece of paper that was generated while he was improving the land, etc., because it was usually a 5-year process for a homestead. So remember, as we pull up again the ancestry write-up, the application is really what we want, not that final piece of paper. So how do I find that application? Well, the first thing I can do is go back to Google, and I could say NARA land entry case files again. Among other things, I'm looking not just for how to find it, but maybe what's going to be in it, how to use it, how to understand what I'm looking at. So that's why I go to Google first a lot of times, because it's going to give me maybe a how-to article or something like that. And one of the things that popped up was this research in the land entry files of the General Land Office. It's a lovely, they call it a pamphlet, but it's a solid little booklet that talks all about the land entry files and how you can access them and request them. And you'll see here that we have some information that I just pulled out, requesting the land entry case file, what you would do based on the date of it, etc. So you can download this and have it. It's a PDF file. Or if you're at the National Archives, there's a great little booklet that you can use. And I usually have it with me whenever I'm at the archives because I do a lot with these records. Another site that came up when I did that search was the National Archives webpage itself, which had the land records and introduction and links to resources on land entry case files and the related records. So once again, I'm going to have more information about them, etc. You might even be able to order online to get the original records in a digitized format or a photocopy. But one of the things that I like about the little booklet as opposed to this is it's going to tell me exactly what I need based on the time period of the record in question, so that I make sure I give them the information they need to be able to request that record or pull it if I'm physically in DC. So here we have the land office, the authority, that's what tells me that it's a homestead file, and then the document numbers. And depending on whether this is a pre-July 1908 or a post-July 1908 determines what kind of information I need to supply as far as requesting this. So I've got some examples down here showing you some pre-1908 examples where you have to supply the land office, in this case Montgomery, Alabama, that it's homestead final certificate number, and that would be the document number that you see here. But this particular entry is issued after July of 1908, so what you really need is the BLM serial number. So this is why I'm saying this little booklet can be very, very useful. And then when you go to the archives, you can have these pulled. One of the things I love about going to the archives is being able to touch those original pieces of paper. These are the pages that were filled out by our ancestors, answered by our ancestors, signed by our ancestors. It's the closest we're going to get to touching them, to making them real. So yet another reason for going offline and getting a sense of the history of our ancestors. All right, so let's plan that research trip that we're going to take to one of these repositories. It's really important before you go that you do certain prep things and have like a little check sheet. This is a great way to do it. Check the open hours. Make sure there's no unforeseen holidays coming up that you didn't think were real holidays outside of the real world. Transportation, parking, are there hotel accommodations nearby? Meal options. If it's a really expensive, like in DC, it's really expensive in town to stay at a hotel. So can you find one that's further out that maybe is on their subway system, etc. You want to review and exhaust those online resources that I've been talking about, both the online catalog as well as any finding aids, any how-to that they have supplied you with. review that online catalog and create your research log specific to this research trip. So in other words, not just in general, but what do you want to accomplish while you're at this physical repository? You want to call ahead to request any special collections that are housed off-site. Some of those may take a week to come in. So you want to do that ahead of time and find out what the limitations are, or if something's going to take a while to come in from off-site. Very important you review the rules and guidelines, because remember, these are manuscript collections, so they're very protective of them. Usually you can only bring in a pencil. If they're going to allow photography, they're not going to allow flash, so you want to make sure that you know how to turn off the flash on your camera. Can you bring in a computer? What kinds of pieces of paper can you bring in, etc.? Are there any fees to either use the collections or to come into the repository or for photocopies, etc.? And is there maybe a possibility of scheduling a consultation with somebody while you're there to get the most of your time, especially if it's a first time at a repository? You gotta get organized. Make sure you have a well-cited tree or family group sheet to work from. It can be on your computer if you're allowed to take a computer in, but you've got to know where you got your information before you got there. Make sure you've got any important documents, whether they're electronic or paper, depending on those repository restrictions, that you may need to have to refer to as you're working in this collection. And then create that research plan. What do you want to find? What records and collections are going to help you? And then start a research log. The research log is most important when you are not finding things, because when you're finding information, you've got physical records. You maybe have digital images or pieces of paper that remind you, oh yeah, I found something. But when it's a negative research, those are the things that you're more apt to repeat. So you want to have some kind of a research log going. It can be a paper log, as this one here that we have available on the American Ancestors website, or you could create something in Word or Excel, whatever you're comfortable with. The other thing that you want to do, big tip, keep a running list of places that you need to visit. Not everything's going to be at one repository. Some things may be in Salt Lake City at the Family History Library, some things at the National Archives. Maybe you've got to go to a very special collection in a specialty repository about, I don't know, ironworks or something. So you want to keep a running list as you're working with your family so that you can pull that up when you need it. One of my biggest recommendations, though, if you're going to a new repository that you've never been to, is to travel with a tour. Back when I was first starting in genealogy, I always made sure that if I was going to a new repository, that I went with somebody who had been frequently. Therefore, they're going to give me the highlights. They're going to show me how to do things. I'm less afraid of making mistakes. But if you get a chance to travel with a tour, first off, you're traveling with others who share your interests. Let's face it, most family members think we're crazy for doing what we do. So if you can share that interest and that enthusiasm, it's going to just rev you up and jazz you up again. It's a great introduction, as I said, to repositories you haven't visited, because you're going with people who are leading the tour who know about that repository. So very often you have professionals that you can turn to for guidance. Oftentimes the tours may include lectures on record types or methodology that can help you get the most out of that trip. And sometimes there may even be side visits to places of interest. So you just never know what you're going to get. I know every time we take a research group somewhere, it's great because we're all there together for maybe a week, and we get to know each other, we get to help each other, and we get to share what we know and point people in the right direction. For instance, our Family History Library tour that we do every year, not only are you going to the Family History Library, which quite frankly is genealogical mecca, but you're also getting a chance for one-on-one consultations with staff who are familiar with the collections at the Family History Library and know what's there and where to point you with your research questions. Additionally, there's tons of finding aids and maybe guides that they have created for a particular repository that deal with their collections, so that maybe you don't have to troll through pages and pages of catalog entries to find what you need. There may be books that are devoted to very specific collections and can point you in the right place. I find that every time I go to the Family History Library for a week, I can get about a year's worth of research done in that week, partly because it's just genealogy and real life isn't getting in the way. And a lot of people now are saying, hey, Family History Library is digitizing everything. It's all online. Well, no, it's not. So here's an example of a collection of vital records that are for Moultrie County, Illinois. Some are still in microfilm format. And sometimes, as I mentioned at the beginning, you may have to physically go to either a family history center or the Family History Library to access things. So if you see a camera that has a little key over it, that means you can't access it from home. So if you've got a lot of those, then going to, taking a tour is a great way to access all of that quickly and save your records, or, digitize things that maybe you can't download from the website, but you could go pull a microfilm and digitize the records. This is just one of the, shall we say, hallways of microfilm stacks at the Family History Library on the second floor. There are almost 3 million reels of microfilm in Salt Lake City. And once again, not all of that has been digitized, and not all of it is available from home. So it's a great way to go and experience the library, but get the most out of your trip if you're going on a tour. If you're interested in some of the tours that we offer, the best thing to do is go to our research and tours page and see what's coming up and take advantage of going with us and learning from us and not spinning your wheels. So quickly in review, many online resources are indexes to the larger manuscript collections that are not available online. You want to be sure to read about the records used in those online sites. Don't just search. Take a moment and see what else is there. Tours are a great way to research in repositories. You want to be a master sleuth. Don't just be satisfied with that, oh, he's not in this index. See what's actually been searched, and then see if there's more that you need to do, because you never know what you may find out. And the more you dig, the more you understand those records, both online and offline, so that the next time you're working in them, you're going to find things quicker. And big thing, travel with us. We love to have a good time, and we are all about genealogy. So, look and see if you're interested in one of those tours that we've got coming up.
All right. Well, thank you, Rhonda, for that fantastic presentation. So let's stop here and see if you have any questions. Go ahead and type it into the questions panel on the right of your screen. So Laurie asks, or is thinking about repositories that maybe that wouldn't have a library catalog, like a town office or a county office or a courthouse. So there are records there. We know that there are records there, but how do we really learn kind of what their holdings are, if they accept researchers, that sort of thing. So thinking even kind of further outside the scope of libraries and kind of research centers.
Well, the first thing would be I would turn my attention first to the FamilySearch Catalog to see what's been microfilmed, because they've gone to as many courthouses as they can get access to microfilm what we as genealogists need. But I would look at that FamilySearch Wiki, because they have it devoted to a lot of different localities, not just in the US, but around the world, telling you where things are, how to access them, how to write for them, how to request them. But in general, once you've identified a courthouse, keep in mind that those people are really, really busy. So you want to be very succinct in your request, and you want to make sure that if there's a fee, that you know about it ahead of time. So sometimes it may be just simply, make a phone call to the courthouse and say, hey, if I need copies of a record, what's the cost? And then that way you could be prepared ahead of time before making your request. And finding those courthouses, they've all got websites these days, and a lot of them do have information about what they have available for genealogical purposes.
And Natalie asks, what about smaller local libraries or maybe local historical societies where our ancestors lived? Is it useful to visit those places as well?
Absolutely. They may have the one record that you need that breaks open that tree wide open. And it could be some random thing like an employment record at a repository that is devoted to maybe a particular large company that closed down and turned over all their records to the local historical society. And now all of a sudden you've got an exact place that this particular employee was born in. So it's always a good idea to look and see what you can find. So if I've got somebody in a census that says, hey, I was a iron ore worker or something, I'm going to look and see if I can find collections in the historical societies that may lead me to more information.
And Sarah asks, is there any kind of master list of, say, genealogical research centers or repositories or, other places that you should be going to as a family historian?
So to get you started, I would certainly visit cyndislist.com, and that's CYNDIS list.com. She's got a lot of subject headings, including repositories that are, unique to places. That's a great way to jumpstart. But quite frankly, Google is my friend. If I'm looking for something, I'm Googling it. And I'm, playing around with my search terms until I get a repository or something that's of interest to me.
Now, Star mentions, you've certainly demonstrated the importance of kind of always seeking out the original source, that there's most likely more information that hasn't been captured in an online database. But can you maybe talk about why not all of that information is searchable and has been indexed and made available on some of these sites? What are the limitations there?
In many instances, some of the limitations have to do with maybe the people who are doing the indexing, the decisions in the publication. So in our example of the Robart or Dwyer papers, whoever, when they were publishing the 3-volume set that then got digitized and put on our website, there was some decision making in the production of those volumes that determined what would and wouldn't get put into the final published book. Sometimes it is what has already been indexed in some manner. So, the Bureau of Land Management records that have been the final certificates that have been digitized and indexed. Some things like the Social Security Death Index, that actually only starts in 1962 for most of us. There's a smattering of pre-people, and it has to do with the fact that computers were coming into use on a daily basis, so they were starting to use it. So sometimes it has to do with, production or pre-planned, publication limitations. Other times it has to do with what's easily available already in a computer format, or what can quickly be like OCR, optical character recognition, where the computer just scans and creates the letters. So it can be any number of reasons why it's not all in there.
And John asks, where should I go first? An archive, a historical society, or a genealogical society for research? If you do have limited time and maybe limited resources and you can't visit every place, what would you suggest is kind of maybe a hierarchy of where to go first and how to kind of attack your offline research plan?
So the biggest thing that's going to determine where you go is your prep work before you get there. Working with those online catalogs and any maybe finding aids that they've put out, what they're calling attention to maybe special collections. Obviously, if you've got limited time, then you want to go to the one that's got the most available things that you can work on quickly, rather than, just the one collection here and then you're going to have to go someplace else. So you want to do that prep work ahead of time before you get someplace physically. Even if all of a sudden you find you've got a day to go someplace because you're there on business or something, make sure the night before you're playing around so that you're hitting the ground running when you get into any kind of a repository. But it all depends on who's got the most stuff that might be of use to you, and that comes into that pre-planning stuff.
All right, so unfortunately that's all the time that we have for today, but thank you everyone for your great questions. If you have a question that we didn't get to, or you're looking for more maybe one-on-one research help, you may consider scheduling a consultation with one of our experts or hiring our research services team. You can learn more about those services by contacting the emails that you see on your screen. I'll also include those in my follow-up email to you. And you may also, as Rhonda mentioned, consider joining us for one of our research tours. The 2020 lineup is now available on our website, and I'll also include a link to that page in my follow-up email. So thank you again for joining us. As you leave the event, you'll have the opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback. As we continue to expand our webinars and online offerings, any and all feedback is extremely helpful and appreciated. If you'd like to access more how-to resources or learn about upcoming online educational programs, please visit our online learning center at americanancestors.org/education. I hope to see you at our online programs in the future. Goodbye for now.